and welcome to CHAD's Ask the Expert. My name is Trish White, and I'm the Director of Training at CHAD. Today, we'll be talking about managing stress for a healthy family. I'm pleased to welcome our experts, Elaine Taylor-Klaus and Diane Dempster, who will share their expertise on how families can manage their stress and communicate effectively. Welcome, Diane and Elaine. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Let's start with a brief introduction, and then I'll follow up with some questions.
Yeah, I've been teaching and talking about stress for many years, decades, and I think I always joke about the fact that we're always called to teach what we're most here to learn.
Right.
And I know my own journey with stress management, both as a parent and outside of being a parent, has been a key part of this. But it's part of how we started at Impact Parents was about my stress, because I realized as a mom of complex kids, I happen to be technically neurotypical, whatever that means. We won't get into definitions around that right now, but I found myself really much more frustrated and overwhelmed and agitated and angry than I wanted to around what was going on in my family dynamic. And so when I realized what I really needed to be working on was my own stress and my own reactivity, it really kind of changed everything. And it feels always like stress is one of those things that feels like it's ever present and it's real. And statistically, we're all feeling it. I mean, I remember looking at some research from about 5 years ago, and it was showing that like 70% of people were experiencing on a daily basis was like beyond kind of what they considered to be manageable, right? And realistic or whatever it is. And so this is such an important topic. And we can dig into kind of the logistics and the ups and downs, but Elaine, what is it that makes this topic important for you?
So our story is similar and different in so many ways, right? But like Diane, I guess unlike Diane, I would say that as a parent, for the first 10, 12 years of my life as a parent, I was a neurotic, stressed out, anxious mom, and overwhelmed. And at the time, I didn't have my own diagnoses. When I was in my 40s, I was diagnosed with both learning and attention issues. But I didn't know that early on. And I didn't understand that my kids had complex issues, or my husband. I just knew that I was trying to do what all the world seemed to expect me to do, and what everybody else around me looked like they were doing easily, although I now know that they probably weren't doing it as easily as I thought they were. And I was trying to do everything the world was asking me to do, and I couldn't do it. And I couldn't hit the metrics. And on the outside, it might have looked okay, but on the inside, it felt like my family life was like a house of cards. And at any given moment, things were going to implode or explode or fall apart or devolve, or, and I was doing everything the experts were telling me to do. And I was reading the parenting books, and it wasn't working. And it wasn't until I discovered coaching and my kids started getting diagnosed and I started getting diagnosed, and I started understanding the foundation of behavior management that I really started getting a handle on the stress. And so, as you said, Diane, part of it was about the change I wanted for my kids started with me. And so I needed to start paying attention to me and managing my stress reactions and my overwhelm and all of that. And part of it was understanding the ways in which all of everybody else's expectations were amplifying the stress in my home. And so part of like creating a healthy, less stressed environment in my home was about letting go of everybody else's expectations and starting to look at what are realistic and fair expectations based on who my family was, what our demographics were, what our neurology was, and beginning to shift how I approach things to set expectations for us instead of trying to continue to live my life according to the whole world's expectations.
When you're talking about expectations within a family dynamic, you do have those external expectations, like being on time or getting good grades or
respectful communication.
Right. But then we also have expectations of how things are going to go ourselves. I mean, you're dealing with you've got a family of 6. I've got a
Multiple,
family of
right?
5, right? It's just sort of when my kids were growing up, it's like everybody has their own story about how something's going to go. And with neurodiversity and ADHD in the mix, a lot of times the stories aren't just, oh, okay, wait, I can change my story. We're not having spaghetti for dinner. This is like the classic story. My kid thinks we're having spaghetti for dinner. All of a sudden they come downstairs and it's macaroni and cheese and hamburgers, and there's a meltdown on the floor.
Right.
And that's because they've created an expectation that this is going to go this way. And maybe they're even hyper focused on it because they love spaghetti. And then all of a sudden they're over here in something else. And so you've got all these moving pieces of expectations we create in every single moment, and everyone creates expectations.
And that's true for little kids and spaghetti and older kids and something else like that. Yeah. I was just dealing with a similar situation with my 22-year-old. So this is not just about little kids. This is about humans.
Triggers, meltdowns, overwhelm, shutdown, all of those things actually start with stress, right? Yeah. Or an irritation. But what we're talking about is over here on the left side, where an irritation exists between what we expect will happen and what is happening, right? And whether it's mom expects that she'll be able to be a great parent, and then all of a sudden mom's having a hard time being a parent, or the kid's expecting spaghetti and gets macaroni and cheese, or there's so many moments in the day that this gap gets created.
Right. And that irritation could be a lot of things. It could be irritation, aggravation, frustration, fear, worry, overwhelm, right? It's whatever happens in that space between expectation and realities. Part of what happens as humans is that when we get aggravated, we then tell ourselves something to make it make sense.
Right. Right.
And
it's that, and that's the piece that's where the stress lives, right? It's this sort of, and so it's this sort of, okay, I should be able to do this, or this should be happening, or if they just, I mean, if you, I know you are all listening and hearing those voices that run in the background in your head all day long. And each one of us, including our kids, have those mental tracks that go on, and they're like, oh, wait, this isn't what's supposed to be happening. Or, oh my gosh, I've got to fix this because it's not the way it should be happening. Or, there's all these sorts of things that create the noise, which actually changes our body chemistry, which actually, that's what stress is. Stress is a change in our body chemistry that tells us that something is a threat. And it says here on this slide, the challenge is that our brain can't distinguish between a physical threat, an emotional threat, or a real threat or a perceived threat. So the part of your brain that says a mountain lion is chasing me, is the same part of your brain that says, oh my gosh, we're going to be late for school and I'm going to have another phone call from the principal. The part of our brain that's able to manage our executive function and to problem solve is literally offline when we're agitated. And so we got to get it back online.
So for the sake of what, right? So the reason we do it is to manage the emotional reactivity. For the sake of what? For the sake of our relationship, for the sake of our connection, for the sake of cultivating an environment of trust with our kids. If we are operating from a constant state of reactivity, our kids aren't going to feel connected and safe with us.
So in your experience working with families where one or more family members have ADHD, do you find that it's a different kind of stress than maybe a neurotypical family experiences? And what are the reasons for that, and who is affected in the family?
It's not that it's that different with people with ADHD. It's just that much more frequent and more intense. And what we're trying to do is reduce the frequency and the intensity of the explosions, outbursts, meltdowns, shutdowns, whatever, because with people with ADHD, we do often have a tendency to be more emotionally reactive, more emotionally sensitive. I often say our highs are higher and our lows are lower. And so, we're constantly getting redirected and corrected from sun up to sundown. And so there's a whole lot more opportunity for upsets in an ADHD environment than there is in a neurotypical environment, because we're constantly getting it wrong and making mistakes, and then feeling bad about it. And then you got the blame and shame cycle and rejection sensitivity and all the stuff that comes with ADHD just makes it like much more higher likelihood of stress and aggravation. Diane, what would you add?
The opportunities for a stress producing event are likely greater when you've got ADHD in the mix, to answer the question. And doesn't mean we can't improve it,
address
improve
it,
it, because the stress is not the thing.
It's the reaction.
It's our reaction to the thing, right? It's just sort of, so I can be late for school every day. I have one mom who's like, you know what? We just decided we're going to be late to school every day because it's not worth the stress to figure out how to get there on time. And so they're like,
eventually they did start getting there on time, by the way.
Yeah, eventually, right?
Just letting you know.
Sort of awesome. We're there at 8:07 and 30 seconds today. That's
progress.
Yesterday. It's that sort of shifting so that you can still solve the problem, but not do it from a place of stress.
Stress doesn't always look like an explosion or a blow up or a freak out. Sometimes, you see a kid who's hiding on video games for hours and hours and hours. That could be a stress response. They could very well be avoiding. And for our kids, sometimes avoiding is the healthiest way in their minds for them to handle the stress that they're dealing with.
Well, and the other thing that just came up as you're saying that, Elaine, I was talking to a mom yesterday whose kid does have some significant challenges with meltdowns, but the meltdowns are only happening at home.
Mm-hmm.
And what we uncovered was that this is a kid who's holding it together all day long to self-regulate when it's really hard, but they really want to not blow up or really not want to hold it together and do okay in school. They're masking, they're doing whatever it is to kind of get through the day. And then when they get home, they're exhausted in their ability to self-manage and go, okay, wait, I don't want to lose it. I don't want to be too reactive. It's offline again.
Okay, so yes, there's more stress in ADD homes than there is in neurotypical homes. There's your bottom line, and there's a lot of good reasons why.
What are the effects on family members when they're dealing with this amount of stress?
Well, I mean, I think it starts with the irritability, whatever that looks like, right? It's this sort of agitation or overwhelm, or there's this sort of underlying just kind of energy, discomfort, right? And it starts there, but that's because we're there in that sort of non-relaxed. I mean, I think about, we use we have a model that has 3 levels: aware, alert, and alarm. And we're walking around aware, things are happening. Oh, look, there's a bird. Oh, look, this is going on, right? And my brain and my body is in neutral, experiencing those sorts of things. And then something happens to excite my body and I go into alert, whether it's I look at my watch and I see what time it is, whether it's I hear mom upstairs yelling downstairs for me to do something again, because mom never always is asking me to do something. Something is raising my level, and it really does change my body chemistry, and it changes my ability to be in a calm, responsive state. I'm much more likely to end up in a reactive state. So if a parent is stressed and something happens wrong, we might be more apt to yell at our kid, or we might be more apt to blame. Blame's another one. It's like this sort of, I have parents all the time who said, my kid blames everybody for everything. Well, blame is a stress reaction. I don't know how to fix this problem, so it's got to be mom's fault, or it's got to be the teacher didn't tell us, or it's this sort of, it's a normal way that the brain, it's like a protective mechanism. I didn't know how to fix this thing, so I got to make up a story, and that's what ends up happening is the brain makes up a story.
And we can be nagging, we can be blaming, we can be avoidant, we can be defensive, we can be offensive, we can, be fix it, we can be
overwhelmed and
lost, maxed out. Like there are all these different ways that we respond to this dynamic, and our kids have very similar reactions. And so when we can identify it and understand, oh, that's a stress reaction, then we can begin to deal with it. It's not them doing it to me. This is how I'm reacting to the circumstances. And we can't control what happens, but we can learn to control how we respond to what happens. And that's the opportunity here.
Well, and I love how you use that language. We can learn to control, because for many of us, it may feel like we don't have a choice, but
We can.
we can. It's like, it's sort of, we got to create some space. We got to create awareness that there's value in doing it. And part of what ends up happening is that stressed out part of us thinks that, yelling or
It's the only solution.
or whatever, it's the only solution, right? And so we get stuck in that loop.
Well, that actually leads me to and flows nicely into my next question on how communication and stress are related. So how can poor communication lead to more stress in a family?
Communications is key. And when we talk about fostering independence and wanting to help our kids move towards independence, I mentioned earlier how important relationship is and trust. Those are foundational to create good, healthy communication. And communication is essential to everything else, right? It's essential to collaboration and buy-in and getting their ownership and all of that. If it's it's not what we say, it's how we say it, or what we don't say, but how we don't say it.
Well, I was just going to give a specific example. I was talking to a mom this week of a senior in high school. And the story in his head, he's a perfectionist kid, and mom unknowingly, unjudgmentally, pops in and says, "Hey, what's going on? How are things going?" Right? Just to check in on him. And what he hears, even though mom didn't say it, was, "Oh my gosh, mom's all up in my stuff again. She doesn't think I'm doing my work. She doesn't trust me. She's not helpful. And I suck." Excuse me for saying that on the webinar here, but it's like this sort of, immediately there's this story, because
The
shame spiral kicks in. And so mom's just showing up with decent communication. It's like what we say, what our body conveys, what they hear, what they perceive. I mean, you've got all these different components that tie into it. It's not just as simple as, "Oh, I'm going to say, hey, honey, I'm going to be late after work today." It's, "Hey, honey, I'm going to be late." It's like, "Oh, you never care about us. Work is so important to you. You never help me out around the house." I mean, it's just, you can hear the story that happens.
Which goes back to the story we're telling ourselves.
Our kids are reacting, and then we react, and then they react to our reaction, and no one's communicating. They're just reacting.
In your opinion, what are some of the reasons that parents and children with ADHD struggle to communicate effectively?
Well, in addition to reactivity, so we talked about that. I think the other piece that happens is that a lot of times we don't communicate in a way that fosters communication, right? And so I think about myself as the neurotypical mom in a family of 5 with 5 other complex people in it. How many times would I be cooking dinner and everybody else is up in another room, and I'd get to the bottom of the stairs and I'd be like, "Hey, time for dinner," and I get nothing back, right? And I'm like, okay, so it's not a realistic expectation for me to be able to yell upstairs to a group of neurodivergent kids and adults who are hyper-focused on whatever they're hyper-focused on, and immediately have them respond. I mean, if you think about it, they've got to notice, they've got to recognize that oh, wait, was that mom's voice? Oh, it was. Was she yelling at me, or was she yelling at the dog? Oh, she was yelling at me. What was she saying? Like, I mean, just those 3 steps, I've already missed what mom said, right? It's just sort of, so we've got to take into consideration what it takes to effectively communicate with anybody, but particularly somebody who might be hyper-focused or distractible or have executive function challenges generally. Elaine, what were you going to add?
So there are 5 key areas that ADHD impacts us: organization, distractibility, attention, emotional reaction, and impulsivity. And every one of those things can be impacted when you're talking about communication. So organization, we have to organize our thoughts. We have to make sure we're talking succinctly and not talking in circles. We have to have a beginning, middle, and end. That can be difficult. Many times I'll say to my husband, can you just give me a thesis statement? Like, what are we talking about here? Because I feel like I've come in at the middle of a sentence or a story. Distractibility. I might be listening to you. I might hear you, but I haven't processed what you said because I'm distracted by something else that's going on. Same with attention. Emotional regulation. It's very hard to hear someone if you're upset about something. Impulsivity. It's hard for me to hear you if I've got something I want to say. And
I'm thinking about what I'm going to say.
Right. So, right. I'm thinking about it instead of listening. So are we hearing or are we listening? Are we processing? All of those pieces are part of what gets impacted in ADHD. So it doesn't matter how the ADHD shows up for you in any of those 5 areas, it can make effective communication more challenging.
Why is it necessary to create and maintain healthy interactions, and what steps can parents take to nurture good communication and strengthen communication skills?
One is setting the intention and beginning to say, you know what, I want to start trying to do this different. I want to start trying to do this differently, right? So we don't want to put stress on ourselves by saying, okay, yesterday we've been having a hard time communicating and today we're going to do it perfectly. That's going to create another layer of stress. And then the other place that I would say to start, besides the obvious, getting out some tools and using the toolbox, is to recover well, right? It's this there's some repair that most of us need to do. And you don't have to go back and say, I'm so sorry, all your life I've been this person that's been blah, blah, blah. Although you may want to do something like that, but it may just be, and I remember I tell this story a lot. It's like, I've lost it with my kids. I'm a recovering yelling mom. I don't think I've said that out loud yet in this call, but I remember one time just sitting down with my kids and curling up on the bed and saying, you know what, I lost it this afternoon and I'm really sorry. And I don't want to be this mom anymore. And I want to do better. And I would love your help to do better because I know that I can't do this alone. Can we all work together on changing the way we're interacting so that we can change the tone in the home and enjoy each other more, right? It's this so sometimes it's like, I got to start with saying, I want a do-over.
You started off by saying, why is it important? So what Diane went to was the solutions, some of the ways to navigate it. That transparent conversation, do-over conversations, being real with them, all of that stuff. For the sake of what? For the sake of being in relationship with our kids or with our partners or with ourselves. The foundation of communication is in trust and relationships. And, we take the position, and maybe this is an assumption for some of you, but for most of us, we're parenting because we want to be in a lifelong relationship with our kids. I had a kid because an adult friend of my parents said to me, if I'd known how much fun my kids would be as adults, I would have had more. And that was exactly why I had my 3rd child. Because it's like, I do want to have fun with my kids as adults. And now they are adults and we are having a blast. I want to be in a lifelong relationship with them. And in order to do that, I have to be real, I have to be human, and I have to cultivate trust and connection and to recognize that they are separate, autonomous human beings who have their own wants and desires and dreams and visions for themselves. And when they're really little, it's okay for us to hold that for them. But then the whole goal is to cultivate that and help them begin to see who they want to become, help them see for themselves and begin to reach for who they are. So all the stuff that we're talking about, helping them manage ADHD and improve communication, it's not, the goal isn't to manage the ADD. The goal is to help every individual who's impacted by ADHD grow into the very best version of themselves that they can possibly be, and to live a life of fulfillment. And all of this is not about the outcome, it's about being in the process of living a healthy, fulfilling life.
What types of tools or services are best to help families during times of stress?
And so the piece here is to really help ourselves and help our family members identify what strategies are you going to use to calm down when you're starting to get triggered, and to start holding them accountable, not to the outcome, but to use the strategy, because nobody ever calms down by telling them to calm down. But they might calm down if you say, you have a toolbox of strategies. What do you want to try right now? My kids used to build up blocks and knock them down and hit pillows and take a baseball bat to break down the recycling and, whatever it is. But what do you need to do right now to reclaim your brain? That's the language we use. And so I think that the other piece, the other side of the question you're asking is that the position we take at Impact is that it's all in the brain. It's all happening in the brain. And we have got to be conscious about managing what's going on in the brain. And so that means if we're starting to get triggered, noticing that we're getting triggered, and to reclaim the brain. And whether it's medication, meditation, food, timeout, earth break, whatever it is, it's committing to reclaiming the brain before we try to regain problem solving.
Would you like to add anything before we wrap up today?
So many things.
So many things. We could have this conversation all day. It's one of our favorite topics. But the thing that I always like to add at this point is to be gentle with yourself. This hopefully we haven't made it sound simple, because this stuff isn't simple, but it is valuable. If you find a way to make it even a little bit of a priority, you will see progress and you will see movement. But be gentle with yourself if it doesn't happen overnight. I've been doing this work for years. I've been teaching this work for years, and I still call myself a recovering yelling mom, because it's a process. And I know what my pattern is when I get dysregulated is my voice gets raised and I tend to shut down, and that's what my body does in response to stress. And so know that this is not easy. Know that it is doable, and just be fiercely committed to doing what you can, whatever day you happen to be listening to this.
We do a lot of work around control and agenda. And part of what happens, I think, in a family dynamic is that we have an agenda. And very often we've been thinking about this agenda for a while. There's something we want done, something we want them to do, something like some way we want them to respond to us, whatever it is. We have an expectation, we have an agenda, and it's ours. And we assume that because it's ours, that it's theirs too. And they have a different agenda because they are this separate human being. And then that creates a difference between priorities, and that creates a power conflict. Mm-hmm. And so the other thing I want to bring into this as we're wrapping this conversation is to really have some honest conversations with yourself. If you're ending up in these control dynamics, what are you holding on to so tightly? Because chances are your kids are also holding on. And I can tell you, as an adult with ADHD, part of what happens is that you can't get yourself to do what the world thinks you should do. And then you feel out of control. And when you feel out of control in your own brain or in your own brain and your own body, you begin to look for ways to exert control wherever you can. And a lot of the power dynamics we get into with our kids, when we feel like they're stubborn or they're obstinate or they're manipulative, is because they are desperately seeking control of themselves. And you're the safe place for them to exert some control. So when you see that, like, we talked earlier about coming up with a new story, instead of he's just so obstinate, she only does what she wants to do. Understand they may be feeling out of control right now. How can I help that? How can I support that? And maybe my exerting my will on top of theirs isn't going to be the most effective way to move forward. Let's slow down and acknowledge what they're going through. We often talk about meet them where they are. This is one of the beauties of the coach approach. And then allow ourselves to be in connection with them before we start to problem solve.
And don't worry, we're not talking about being a doormat as a parent. We're talking about really regulating the partnership between you and your family member so that you can move the situation forward.
Where can people who are listening today find more information about you and get in contact with you?
So we actually have a free guide that we wanted to share with the audience today, Trish. It's at impactparents.com/Chad. And it's a guide that we created at Impact Parents that has our top 12 strategies to really help you create a calm and peaceful home, and then also really focus on how to help your kids to become more independent.
Well, thank you very much for your time today. I appreciate all that you've shared with us. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure our viewers have as well. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having us. We really appreciate it.